Hey guys, this is AJ from the Paladin Journal, and it is book review day once again. And the book that we're talking about today is The Lion, Son of the Forest by Mike Brooks. This Warhammer 40,000 novel was released last year to coincide with the release of the Lion's official model for Warhammer 40,000. And this book and the model itself and the lore that came out at the time, all of it combined to tell us the story of how Lionel Jonson, the first Primarch, Lord of the Dark Angels, of how he returned back to Warhammer after an absence of 10,000 years since the end of the Horus Heresy. And it has been quite a journey for me. Now, I listened to the audiobook of this one, which in many cases is an additional element of interest because the last audiobook that I listened to for from Black Library in general was the Prospero Burns novel for the Horus Heresy series, and that was kind of not a good experience for me because I could not connect with the story at all, and I did not like Dan Abnett's portrayal of the Space Wolves in that book. However, this thing completely separate. I went into it with completely fresh eyes, and I have to say that I was very surprised. Now, the novel is written by Mike Brooks, as I said, but the audio is narrated by Timothy Watson. And I thought that overall the chapters, approximately 12 and a half hours worth of material, I think he did a pretty damn good job. He modulates his voice quite a bit between the different characters, although I would say that it didn't go the distance that I expected it to. I've listened to two more audiobooks since then, or an audiobook and a half since I've listened to this one, and I found those performances much better because the quality of the narration and the voice acting was so much different. However, regardless of that, this is not a full production audiobook as some others are on the market, so I am totally fine with that. Timothy Watson did a pretty good job with differentiating some of the characters, giving them a tiny little bit of accents and stuff, and that worked for me by and large. I wasn't expecting anything spectacular. My expectations were met quite handsomely, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now, on to the story itself. As I said, this is the tale of how Lionel Jonson returns to the Warhammer 40k universe, and we find out that while the rest of the galaxy has seen approximately 10,000 years pass by, for him, it's only been a moment from the time that he disappeared at the destruction of Caliban at the end of the heresy to the current timeline, which is set in the Indomitus Crusade era with Gilliman, another Primarch, and Lion's brother. He's already come back. He's changed so much about the Imperium. He's launched a new crusade to reunify the Imperium at large, and that's kind of the whole thing that's going on with respect to what's the context of the story. Now, a lot of the initial chapters that deal with the Lion's feelings of being a character out of time, out of place, because the Imperium has changed so much. You know, he meets some general humans first, then he meets another Space Marine, then he eventually meets, a whole contingent of Space Marines, and he meets a lot of the soldiery and the citizenry of the Imperium, and we see, this inner conflict that's going on about how much the Imperium has changed, how much his father's vision has been debased, how much it has been corrupted by those in power, and he is very much a changed person himself because, from everything that I've read from the Horus Heresy series, although it's not extensive in of my reading, that is, he was a very cold person, not easy to understand on the page, and not easy to understand in terms of other characters' view of him, because he was cold, he was distant, he was very arrogant, and he was just so mysterious. And it certainly didn't help that the first book that we got him, Descent of Angels, it did a very poor job of representing the dynamics between the Lion and the Dark Angels Legion at large. And it was setting up all this 40k stuff, all the mysteries and things and it just did not do a good job. However, this is a very different portrayal, and we see a lot of character growth from the Lion, which I really appreciated. Anything from the perspective of a Primarch, whether it's in the Horus Heresy series or it's in the modern 40k timeline, it's always an interesting read because these people, these Primarchs, they have such a different context of what the galaxy is supposed to be, and their own experiences are so different. And Mike Brooks really captures the heart and soul of that whole dynamic. And I really enjoyed all the introspective stuff that was going on, and this inner conflict the Lion has about how he should proceed. And like when he goes to a world, it's one world, and he has to meet not just the rulers of the world, but there's the question of him meeting the members of the local ecclesiarchy, and he's like, I don't want to meet them. I want to avoid that. And it's a really, Mike Brooks doesn't go into much detail on that specific example, but I appreciated that he put that perspective in, because we've seen from the Dark Imperium novels by Guy Haley, which focus a lot on Gilliman, about what Gilliman thinks of the whole thing, because he's had a much more direct contact with the highest echelons of highest echelons of imperial bureaucracy, going all the way to Terra, the High Lords of Terra, and he's seen quite a bit since his return. And even though everything has been retconned since his first coming in 8th edition of 40k towards what happened with 9th edition, he's seen so much, he's experienced so much, and he's tried to maintain that same distance in regards to how he approaches the different governing arms of the Imperium. And we see all of that in a microcosm with the Lion as well. And what's really important now is that as part of his character growth, the Lion is much more of an inspiring figure. Now, it's not too much of a spoiler to say that there are some Fallen involved, and if you are familiar at all with some of the recent lore that's come out with the Fallen, with the release of the Dark Angels Codex and what was it, late Jan, early February, and the Inner Circle companions that have shown up and whatnot, there's a lot of different aspects of the loyalties of the Fallen. Some of them are, they still believe in the Imperium, but they want nothing to do with the Imperial bureaucracy. Some of them have completely turned traitor. They've abandoned all their former loyalties. They have gone over to chaos, and they just want to, they just want to kill stuff. They want to get power, and they just want to, they just want to be free. And a lot of that is also covered in this novel. We see a lot of different perspectives on this. I'm not going to go into much detail actually, because a lot of the part of the allure of those chapters, of those scenes, is seeing those perspectives yourself and seeing how those characters approach those situations and how they deal with all of that. What is the result? How that affects everything that happens later on down the line. And I can say that there are quite a lot of Fallen involved, perhaps a bit too much, for my taste at least. And the way that they were revealed, I thought was a bit of a, they're just doing it for the numbers rather than any unique take on it. Because as we've seen from some previous novels, especially those by Gav Thorpe, who is one of the quintessential Dark Angels writers, the Dark Angels chapter in modern 40k, it is devoted to the hunt for the Fallen. They chase down the slightest rumors. They have gone so far as to attack and even destroy other Imperial forces if it interferes with their hunt for the Fallen. And their 10,000 crusade for this redemption in the eyes of their own chapter, it is something that burns at it's at the core of their identity, so to speak. And those novels and those stories give you the illusion that there's not that many Fallen in the galaxy at large, and the Dark Angels are probably even then they have probably hunted down and killed or imprisoned and tortured and made to repent a few hundred of those. However, this novel, to my knowledge at least, this is the first novel that gives us an actual number of how many quote unquote fallen there are, whether they are loyalists or they're traitors or what have you on that entire spectrum. And it is a large number. It is a much larger number than I was expecting. And a lot of the information that comes out about how the destruction of Caliban happened and, the lion returns from the end of the heresy and he is looking to go back to Caliban and, regroup, rest, regather his forces and everything, all of that. But there's a betrayal that happens. Who's ultimately responsible? How it might have gone on and stuff. And it's all these juicy little details connecting the 30k Dark Angels to the modern Dark Angels, the 30k Lionel Jonson to the 40k one, and the perspectives of these fallen characters. So I could have done with a fewer number of fallen being shown, at least the quote unquote loyalist ones, but I thought it was fine. In the end, uh, it was quite an organic thing, and the galaxy has changed a lot from the days of the novels that I was talking about, the ones with Gav Thorpe, because all of those are written prior to the end of the 41st millennium. They're written in M41, while these novels and these stories moving forward, they're all in M42. It's like a few decades after the return of Gilliman and the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the great rift that divides the galaxy, and everything. The landscape of the story has changed so much in those decades. So, in that context, I suppose that it makes sense for the fallen to congregate as they do, and to take advantage of the opportunities that they have now. So that was pretty good. In terms of the antagonists, I thought there was a good mystery going on in the early chapters, but towards the end, it kind of got a little too, I wouldn't say campy, but it was a little too by the numbers, even though the twist about the objective of the big bad was quite a striking one. Even though, it's funny, it actually goes back to some of the wildest theories about key character for the Imperium from the oldest lore, some of the oldest lore that we have, that is largely ignored these days. It's an aspect that is not focused on. But I like that Mike Brooks connected so many disparate timelines and all these theories and stuff, and he gave us a really interesting package that you look at the big picture and it's like, wow, this is a really good story, and it really is. The Lions of the Forest is a novel that I recommend quite highly. Overall, it has a good pace, it has good characters, and it has some really interesting scenes of emotional connection, which is not something that you would really expect to hear in a story about Primarchs and Space Marines, but it is there because a lot of the novel is about correcting your failures and trying to be better. In the immortal words of Tobey Maguire from Spider-Man 3 MCU. So that is all there, and this is the focus. This is not the focus. This is the base for all stories featuring the line moving forward. So if you want to get context about who he is as a character, what the Fallen are, what all the different viewpoints are like, how their experiences have changed not only those characters, but also the galaxy around them, the people around them, and the overall structure of the narrative, you need to read this. I would I would even say that this, if you're new to Warhammer 40,000, or if you're an old veteran like me, or even a bigger veteran than me, you've read like twice the number of novels I have, and even for, like, I would say I've read quite a few, like probably like 100 plus at least. Um, this is a very key novel for understanding the modern 40K narrative, and it's going to become a classic read in like another 10 years, 15 years, because there's so much good stuff here. Mike Brooks, even though he's talking about so much that happened in the heresy and its after effects, he really grounds the characters and the narrative into the modern setting, and so that you never feel lost. There's some amusing mysteries that are going on, and it helps if you have some prior context for some of those characters and the situations. But even then, he gives you a really good framework to understand all of that. So, in that aspect, I think he did a fantastic job. Overall, again, also a great cover. I'm not sure who the artist is, but he or she, they did a bang up job with this one. And, that's pretty much it for me. Highly recommended novel, and it also encourages me to read more Mike Brooks. I think I read some Mike Brooks stuff before. I'm not sure at the moment because I kind of had this period between like 2014 to 2020ish where I wasn't really reading much. I kind of got out of it. But I think I read some of his short story stuff, and having read this novel or having listened to this audiobook now, I think I want to read more because I think he had a good grasp of the setting and the characters, and I really want to see what more he has done and experience that for myself. So, anyways, guys, that's all for me for now. I'll be sure to bring you another review soon. We'll keep an eye out for that on the channel. And cheers. Goodbye.